I'm 63 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I knew my son better than anyone. My name is Margaret Hayes. I raised him by myself after his father left, poured everything I had into making sure he had a good education, a good home, and a chance at a better life than mine. For decades, I worked double shifts at a small insurance office, skipping vacations, mending my own clothes, and putting every spare dollar toward his future. I thought that made us close. I thought that made me safe. But the night I discovered the truth, I stood frozen in my kitchen with the receiver pressed to my ear, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echo inside my skull. I had gone back to grab the blood pressure pills I had left on the counter. The suitcase was already in the trunk, the cruise ticket folded neatly in my purse. My son's voice drifted through the line before he realized he hadn't ended his call. He was laughing softly with his wife, his words slicing into me like a blade. "It's a one-way ticket. She won't make it back. We'll just say it was an accident over the rail." I remember gripping the edge of the counter, the linoleum cool beneath my bare feet, as if the house itself was bracing me against a collapse. In that moment, the air turned sour, and the kitchen that had been the heart of my home became a stranger's place. My only child, the boy I once carried on my hip, had plotted to erase me for money, rage and disbelief twisted together inside me. I didn't scream. I didn't burst into tears. I stood there, breathing slowly, while a wave of icy clarity washed over me. If my son had decided my life was disposable, then I would have to decide how to protect it. And I knew right then, I would go on that cruise. I would play along. But I would not be the victim of anyone's plan, not even his. The morning of the trip was calm, almost too calm. The suitcase I had packed sat by the front door, zipped tight, with my sensible walking shoes and a stack of paperback novels I had meant to read for years. Daniel had insisted I wouldn't need much. "It's all included on board, Mom. You just need a few outfits to enjoy yourself." His voice was warm, rehearsed, like a salesman trying to close the deal. I studied his face when he pulled up to drive me to the port. 37 years old, handsome in the way strangers might trust. But there was something coiled behind his eyes that morning. Claire sat in the passenger seat, her phone glued to her hand. She barely looked up as I climbed in, murmuring, "You're going to love this, Margaret. 7 days of nothing but ocean breezes and relaxation." Her words were smooth, but her smile stopped at her lips. The highway stretched wide and glittered in the early sun. Daniel chatted about trivial things, the weather, gas prices, how much he hated his boss. I answered when I had to, but inside, every syllable of that overheard call echoed like a drum. "It's a one-way ticket." I kept my gaze fixed on the horizon, nodding, smiling faintly, while a storm brewed quietly in my chest. At the port, the cruise ship towered over the dock, white steel gleaming, the name Ocean Star painted in bold navy letters. It looked like a floating city, a promise of luxury and distraction. I tightened my grip on the handle of my suitcase. Daniel hugged me briefly, too quickly, his arms rigid. "Enjoy yourself, Mom. Don't worry about a thing." He pressed the paper ticket into my palm, his thumb lingering just a second too long. I wanted to ask him why. Why had he decided my life was worth less than whatever insurance money he imagined collecting? Why had Claire, the woman I welcomed into my home with open arms, agreed? But I swallowed the words. I had already decided. I wouldn't confront them here. Not yet. If I played my hand too early, I would lose everything: proof, safety, and perhaps my only chance at survival. Inside the terminal, the air buzzed with chatter and rolling suitcases. Families laughed, couples posed for photos, children tugged on their parents' sleeves. I walked among them as though I were one of them, but every step felt heavier. When the clerk scanned my ticket, a small shiver ran down my spine. I told myself, keep moving, keep breathing. You're not the victim here. Not yet. On board, crew members in crisp uniforms greeted us with practiced cheer. A smiling attendant offered me a glass of sparkling cider as I stepped onto the carpeted atrium. Chandeliers glittered overhead. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and passengers posed against the grand staircase for photos they would send to loved ones. I accepted the glass, forced a smile, and kept walking. My cabin was on the 8th deck, with a balcony overlooking the endless sea. The room was tidy, modest, with fresh sheets and a small vase of lilies by the bed. I set down my suitcase and locked the door behind me. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the balcony rail. I imagined the sound my body would make if it toppled over, swallowed by the dark water below. A chill rippled through me, and I backed away. I pulled the curtains shut. This room was supposed to be a retreat, a gift, but it felt like a trap dressed up in silk and perfume. I sat on the bed, the cruise brochure lying open beside me, and whispered to myself, "You're here now. He thinks you're naive, helpless. Prove him wrong. Find a way to turn this gift into his downfall." The ship's horn bellowed, deep and commanding, as the ocean star prepared to leave port. The walls trembled with its power. I inhaled, steady and deliberate, bracing myself for what lay ahead. This wasn't just a vacation anymore. It was the beginning of a silent war. The first evening on the ship felt strangely theatrical, as though every laugh and every clink of a champagne flute was part of a play staged to distract me from what I already knew. Passengers strolled the decks with ice cream cones, couples danced under strings of lights, and the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. I walked among them, keeping my pace steady, my smile faint, my eyes sharp. I decided to explore, telling myself that blending in was safer than hiding in my cabin. The grand dining hall gleamed with polished brass and velvet chairs. Waiters in white jackets carried silver trays, announcing dishes with an elegance I wasn't used to. I sat alone near the back, pretending to study the menu, when a voice startled me. "Traveling solo?" I looked up into the face of a woman with cropped silver hair and sharp blue eyes. She was about my age, maybe a few years older, dressed in a tasteful navy dress. She held her tray with confidence, the kind of presence that didn't ask for permission. "Yes," I said, my voice calm, though my fingers tightened around the napkin. "Then you shouldn't eat alone," she replied, sliding gracefully into the chair across from me before I could object. "I'm Evelyn Brooks." Her directness disarmed me, and before long we were talking about books, about music, about the way people our age are treated as if we've already had our story. She was quick-witted, dryly funny, and I found myself laughing, a sound I hadn't expected to make that night. For a short while, I almost forgot why I was there. Almost. Later, as we walked out together, I noticed him. A man in a pale gray jacket, leaning against the wall near the elevators. He pretended to scroll through his phone, but his eyes lifted the moment we passed. I caught it, the too quick glance, the way he tracked me. My skin prickled. "Friend of yours?" Evelyn asked lightly, catching the shift in my posture. "No," I said. "At least, I don't think so." The man boarded a different elevator, his reflection in the mirrored doors lingering a second longer than it should have. My stomach twisted. Evelyn narrowed her eyes, but said nothing more. Back in my cabin, I locked the door and stood still, listening. The faint hum of engines filled the silence, but beneath it, I thought I heard footsteps in the corridor, slow, deliberate, fading only when I held my breath. I checked the balcony lock twice before drawing the curtains closed. I sat on the bed, the ship gently rocking beneath me. My pulse still raced from the sight of that stranger. I told myself it could be nothing, a fellow passenger, curious. Yet deep down, I knew. Daniel had mentioned help. Someone had to be watching me. I picked up the phone and considered calling security, but stopped. If I sounded paranoid too soon, no one would take me seriously later when it mattered. Instead, I whispered into the darkness. Not yet. Watch me all you want. You'll see I'm not the easy mark you think I am. The ship's horn groaned again as midnight approached, long and low, vibrating through the metal walls. It felt like a warning, or maybe a promise. By the second day, the ocean star felt less like a vacation and more like a stage set where I was expected to play the role of an oblivious tourist. I couldn't allow that. If Daniel wanted to erase me quietly, I had to build my case loudly, even if no one else could hear it yet. That morning, I found an internet lounge tucked behind the casino. The rows of computers were mostly occupied by teenagers checking their social feeds, but I sat down and opened a secure email account I hadn't used in years. My fingers trembled as I typed out a message to Frank Doyle, a retired police investigator I'd hired once before to look into an insurance scam at work. He was discreet, stubborn, and most importantly, he owed me a favor. I told him everything: the overheard call, the suspicious cruise ticket, the stranger in the gray jacket. I asked him to run Daniel's name through every database he could: debts, gambling, mortgages, anything that smelled of desperation. If my son was plotting to profit from my death, there would be a financial trail. When I hit send, my hands shook so badly I had to press them flat against the desk. A woman beside me asked if I was all right. I smiled tightly, nodded, and left before my voice could betray me. Later that afternoon, I walked to the passenger services desk. The clerk, a cheerful young woman with a neat bun, greeted me brightly. I slid my ticket across the counter and asked, as casually as I could, about my return arrangements. She typed quickly, her smile never fading, then tilted her head. "Mrs. Hayes, I don't see a return flight linked to your reservation. Your ticket ends here at disembarkation." The floor seemed to tilt harder than the sea beneath us. I leaned in, forcing a calm tone. "Could you print me a record of that?" She nodded, and moments later I was holding a receipt that confirmed my worst suspicion. Daniel hadn't booked a way home. I bought my own return flight then and there, using my credit card. As the clerk printed the new confirmation, I kept my expression neutral, but inside my chest burned with a mix of fear and fierce determination. This slip of paper was more than travel. It was proof, another brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. Back in my cabin, I tucked the receipt into a book of crosswords, slipped my phone into the drawer, and sat with the curtains closed. The ship rocked gently, lulling others into comfort, but to me it felt like the pulse of danger. I pressed record on a small digital device I'd brought with me, whispering details into it: the date, the man in gray, the missing flight, the sound of Daniel's voice on that call. Each word was a lifeline I was throwing to my future self. When I finished, I sat in the dim light, listening again for footsteps outside the door. Silence stretched thin and sharp. I thought of Daniel's thumb pressing too long on my ticket, a gesture so small, but now, with this evidence in hand, it felt like the moment I had begun to turn his plan against him. On the third evening, the phone in my cabin rang just as I was brushing my hair. The old landline-style receiver startled me with its shrill tone. I lifted it slowly, already knowing who it would be. "Hi, Mom." Daniel's voice came, bright and practiced. "Just checking in. How's the cruise treating you?" There was a pause. Then Claire's voice chimed faintly in the background. "Be sure to enjoy the balcony. That's what you paid for." The words made my skin crawl. I forced a light laugh. "It's beautiful, Daniel. The air out here is refreshing." I let the lie roll off my tongue, careful to sound casual. "Don't worry about me." When the call ended, I placed the receiver down with deliberate calm, then hit record on my device to capture every word I could still recall. It wasn't direct proof, but the intent seeped through every syllable. That night, I decided to walk the upper deck, hoping the ocean air might steady me. Instead, the same man in the pale gray jacket appeared again, leaning against the railing as if he'd been waiting. His eyes flicked toward me, then away. But not before I caught the tension in his jaw. He fell into step behind me as I moved toward the stairwell, my pulse hammered. I stopped suddenly. Turning on my heel, he froze too, pretending to examine a life jacket box bolted to the wall. "Do you need something?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He shook his head, muttered, "Just looking," and disappeared down the stairs. The chill in my bones told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just another tourist. Back in my cabin, I double-locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat in the dark until the trembling in my hands subsided. It was time to act. If I waited too long, I might not have another chance. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Captain Thomas Reed. His office smelled of leather and salt, and his eyes were steady, the kind of eyes that had seen storms and mutinies alike. I told him everything: the overheard call, the missing flight, the stranger who kept following me. He listened without interruption, his fingers steepled. When I finished, he leaned back slowly. "Mrs. Hayes, we take safety very seriously here. If what you're saying is true, we'll need to handle this discreetly." For the first time since I'd stepped aboard, I felt something close to relief. Someone else knew. Someone else would be watching. The gala night shimmered with chandeliers and polished glass, a spectacle designed to dazzle. Guests in gowns and tuxedos drifted toward the ballroom, laughter bouncing off the golden walls. A string quartet played, and waiters carried trays of champagne as if nothing in the world could disturb this floating paradise. But for me, every note felt like a countdown. I wore a navy dress I hadn't touched in years, its fabric cool against my skin. Evelyn stood beside me in emerald silk, her calm presence steadying my breath. Captain Reed's plan was in motion. I would show myself at the gala, then leave my cabin unguarded. If the man in gray was truly here for me, he would take the bait. I smiled at strangers, nodded at compliments, and pretended to toast to health and happiness. Across the room, I spotted him. Gray jacket, alone, his eyes scanning. He wasn't here for music. He was waiting for me. When the captain raised his glass for a toast, I leaned toward Evelyn. "It's time." She gave the smallest nod, her hand brushing mine in reassurance. I left the ballroom, heels clicking against the carpet, the hum of the ship vibrating beneath me. My cabin door loomed ahead. I walked past it deliberately, counting each step, before slipping into a small alcove behind a pillar. My pulse throbbed in my throat. Minutes later, he appeared. He looked left, then right, before crouching at my door. A thin tool gleamed between his fingers. The lock clicked softly. He slipped inside. My body shook with rage and fear, imagining how close I had come to being nothing more than a body in the waves. Before I could let the thought unravel me, a sharp command split the hallway. "Security! Hands where we can see them!" 2 officers surged forward, catching him just as he turned to run. He struggled, cursed under his breath, but the cuffs snapped around his wrists. The lockpick clattered to the floor. I stepped out from hiding, my breath unsteady, my eyes locked on his. For a fleeting moment, He glared at me with hatred that chilled my bones. But then one of the officers held up his phone, the screen still glowing. A string of messages lit up the display. The first one froze me in place. Push her after the gala. Make it look like an accident. Signed with my son's name, Daniel Hayes. The corridor blurred. For a heartbeat, I thought I might collapse. But Evelyn's hand was suddenly at my elbow, steady and firm. Captain Reed arrived, his face stern, his voice decisive. The device was sealed as evidence. The man escorted away. "You're safe now," the captain told me. But safe didn't feel like the right word. Not when my own child had signed my death sentence. As the hallway cleared, I realized I wasn't trembling anymore. Beneath the grief and shock, something harder had formed inside me. Daniel had believed I was weak, an easy target. Tonight proved him wrong. When the Ocean Star reached port, the man in gray was escorted down the gangway in handcuffs. The officers who met us wore serious expressions, their movements crisp, as though they already knew they were collecting more than a petty thief. His phone, sealed in a clear evidence bag, glowed faintly with unread messages. Daniel's name sat there like a wound that refused to close. In the weeks that followed, Frank Doyle worked quickly. He sent me copies of his findings, gambling markers from Atlantic City, pawn slips with Daniel's handwriting, mortgage papers doctored so badly it was a miracle they had passed a bank. Claire's debts stretched pages long, from credit cards to overdue medical bills. Together they had created a hole so deep that only my death could fill it. The trial was swift, but not painless. I walked into that courtroom with my shoulders square, yet inside I was trembling. Daniel looked smaller than I remembered, but not weak, just cornered. He avoided my eyes until the prosecutor read his messages aloud, each one slicing through the air like a blade. Push her after the gala. Make it look like an accident. Claire sobbed on the stand, claiming she had been manipulated. But the jury had the paper trail, the phone logs, the witness statements from Evelyn and the ship's security. Their verdict came back in less than 3 hours. The judge's words rang final. 20 years for Daniel, 10 for Claire. The gavel struck, and I felt the sound echo through my chest. Justice didn't feel like victory. It felt like a breath I'd been holding for months, finally released into the open air. Survival was my triumph, and it was enough. After the sentencing, I packed my life into boxes. The house where Daniel had taken his first steps, where I had measured his height on the pantry wall, no longer felt like a home. It was a museum of ghosts, each corner whispering of love I had given freely and betrayal I had never imagined. I sold it without ceremony, handing the keys to strangers who would never know the laughter or the shadows it held. I moved into a small apartment near the bay. The mornings there were different, pale light spilling across the water, gulls wheeling overhead, the scent of salt and kelp in the breeze. I bought a modest second-hand chair for the balcony and sat there often, reminding myself that this view, this air, was mine alone. At the community center, I found women like me. Some had lost children. Some had survived husbands who treated them as property. Some had simply been forgotten. We sat in circles, sharing pieces of ourselves we had buried for too long. When I told my story, I expected pity. What I saw instead was recognition. They knew the ache of betrayal, the sharp edge of survival. Evelyn remained by my side. One evening, she tugged me into a dance class. My steps were clumsy, my timing off, but the music carried me forward. I laughed, a sound I hadn't trusted in months, and for a moment, I felt lighter than I had since before the cruise. At night, I sometimes still hear Daniel's voice, but I no longer wake in fear. I wake to the sound of waves and open the balcony doors. I placed my hands on the rail, steady, unafraid. They had sent me on a one-way trip. Instead, I turned it into the beginning of my return. At 63, I finally chose life. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.